Welcome into the studio, another pastel tutorial. As you can see, we've got a really vibrant, rich snow scene for this episode. And it took me around about 5 hours to complete. Got my hand there in the corner, just so you can get some kind of scale that I was working on. As you can see, it's a white scene, but it's not really white at all. So let's get started. I've got my mid-tone grey pastel matte paper. Now many of you may be surprised that I'm using this dark grey really, and you probably would have thought I would have used or chosen white instead, because you know the scene is really basically very light in colour. But the reason I picked up the grey, I did think about various reasons and ideas and what colour to use. I could have used the blue as well, that would have worked. The reason I've used the grey is to make the white show up. Now if I'd used the pastel matte white paper, the white lines we wouldn't be able to see now, and that's just transfer paper. I use white transfer paper to put those lines on there, so that wouldn't have shown at all. I would have had to have then used either black transfer paper, or a better alternative would have been to have toned the back of the reference photo by putting some perhaps blue pastel on there and using that to transfer over. So I could have done it that way, but when I was then going to put in the whites of the snow, then once again that wouldn't have shown up. So that's why I've used the grey. Now because pastel is so opaque, I know full well that when I put in the pure whites onto this pastel matte paper, it's going to completely cover it and you won't see any grey there at all, as you saw in the initial photograph. So that's why I've used that paper. Now all I'm doing, as you can see, I've just got a dark Carbothello pastel pencil. It happens to be, but it could have been any brand, and I'm just lightly, very lightly putting in where the darker areas are on this drawing. And then after that I'll just take a white pastel pencil and I'll put in all of the lighter white areas as well. So now I'm going to make a start on the blue. Now I could use sticks for this stage, I could use pan pastels, I could just use pencils, doesn't really matter. So you know, use whatever supplies you've got. Now pastel sticks or pan pastels, they cover quicker than the pencils. As you can see with the pencils, I can see the tooth of the paper very easily. With the sticks it covers easier. See how I use that paper to check if the colour is fairly accurate, if the tone, so the lightness and the darkness of that colour is fairly accurate. I do it at a really early stage, so it's slightly bluer mine, but when you squint, the tone is just about right, and that's what I need when I start off. The colours can be adjusted, so I've just switched to a Carbothello pencil. That's gone just slightly lighter. See, I'm just playing around with some colours that I think are quite close, just to see if I can get it. So once again I've got a Caran d'Ache, sorry, is what I should have said before, and that's a Caran d'Ache again. I just put a bit of that warmer colour on top of the blue. So I know now that if I use the 3 or 4 bits of supplies I've got in my hand, I can get a really accurate representation of that warm blue, that reddy blue that I'm seeing on this first rock. It's important to get something correct, you know, and accurate early on. If I'm out by miles on this rock, then when I judge the next snow-covered rock by this rock, that's going to be off as well, and the one after that will be off, and the one after that. In the end, I'll then have all the paper covered in pastel, and it's all going to be off compared to what I wanted it to be. Now this is something to keep in mind no matter what you're doing. It could be an animal, a portrait, a dog portrait, a cat portrait. It's irrelevant what it is. You want to try and get fairly accurate. It doesn't have to be exact, because remember with pastels, as you know, we can layer and layer and really adjust things much more than almost every other medium. So we've got, it's very forgiving, but we want to, for our own benefit, get pretty accurate quite early on. So the other way of doing it is to use small swatches, where you put some of your pencil or your pastel, whatever it is, on a little piece of the paper and then hold that up to the reference photo. But I find it really valuable to fold your photo, and obviously it's got to be a really good printout as well. So don't go using cheap printer paper. Make sure you're using a matte, but matte is my preferred paper. A nice thick matte photo paper needs to be accurate, otherwise it's worthless doing it. If you use a glossy paper, that'll work okay, but just keep in mind with the glossy papers you usually can have some shine from within the room, so just keep that in mind. But get the accuracy early on. Now some of the colours are really quite punchy. That's one of my usual words I use, but as you can see, they are punchy colours, they're vibrant colours. When we're doing something like white rocks, white snow coloured rocks like this, we're not really expecting to see very vivid blues, vivid turquoises as well, and all these other colours that we are going to see in there. We're not really mentally expecting to see them looking like that. I've pushed the colours a bit just to make it a bit more, I think, pleasant to look at as a piece of art. I'm not always out to recreate what I'm seeing in a photograph. I'm trying to push it a bit myself as well, make it more interesting. But because we're not really expecting to see perhaps lots of colours in there, that's where you've got to be checking that reference frequently at those early stages. Otherwise I would never have guessed putting a blue such as this on the rock. I would have done something much more subdued. By putting the reference photo and folding it and putting it up to the paper, that gives me confidence and assurance that what I'm doing is right. If it looks right on the photograph, you see I'm checking again, that's really pretty close. If it looks right on the photograph and I can get the same as that, then of course it must look right in the end on my piece of art as well. So as I said, it gives me the confidence to keep going with it. Using my pencil on the side, because I'm not digging into the paper, I'm just putting very light amounts of pastel down. Now that has the benefit as well as sharpening my pencil. So I'm turning the pencil every now and again so that I'm getting a nice sharpened point on it. Now of course, other than the colour and tonal changes, you're going to see very similar or the same technique on all of the rocks. So that's when I'm going to start speeding up the video. Otherwise you're all going to fall asleep when you just see me doing the same thing over and over again. Now I'm putting the lighter edge in place already, because otherwise you could see when I'm blending I could quite easily lose the position of the rock and then end up having to make a best guess at it. This way I've got that separating line already in place, so I know it's in the correct area. Now another important part of this drawing is that the blues have also got this kind of a warm purple hue on top of it as well, and I found that in my my Caran d'Ache pencils. I don't use many of those, as you probably know, but every now and again there's a colour that I haven't got in my Carbothello and my Pitt pencils that I do find in the Caran d'Ache. So I just layered that on top of the blue by putting the pencil on its side and basically glazing the colour on top. And then rubbed it in with my fingers. And now all I really need to do is to just keep moving on to the next rock. So sometimes the rocks are slightly lighter, sometimes they're slightly darker, but that's what then separates them all from being one mass. It's usually the highlight across the edge of the surface of the rock that separates them all off from each other. So this rock needs to have some shading on there, some shadows. There's probably trees or branches around. So I need to put in some darker blue. That's a Derwent pastel pencil. You can see the pencil is quite blunt. I don't need sharp edges. With these shadows that's casting on the rock, if the branch or whatever's casting them is not really right by the rock, then we're going to have fuzzy edges. If the branch was really close by, obviously, and the sunlight is bright like it is, then we'd have much sharper edges. So that's another thing I've got to keep in mind. Just lightly put in this darker colour, darker tone on top of the underlayer. And that's giving that effect of just these subtle shadows casting over the shape of the rock surface. Now some areas of this stream are blue, some are green, and some are blue-green. So that's where you'll see me layer the colours on top and then blend them. I'm just subtly adjusting colours and tones. You see, I needed that to be a bluey green, a lightish bluey green. So I put the blue on, lightened it a bit, and then I'm putting the green on. Rubbing it together, that's where I've got that lighter blue-green. And I'll keep adding to it and making fine adjustments. You see, I needed it to be even more blue. And it's going back and forth like that till I've got it what I think is just right. Now I'm happy with the base colours I've got on that top bit of the stream. It's all blended in. Now I can start to refine it and add some more details, some lighter details on top. So remember, we need to make sure that we've got the underlayer done first. I don't really want to be going in again and making adjustments once I've done these small top details. You know, in real life, these details are picking up on the top surface of the water where we've got those small undulations. So that's the way we're drawing it. I could come back in, darken a few areas if I wanted to, but I want to make sure that the underlay was done to the correct colour and tone really before I did this, so I wasn't going to have to go and put much more darks in, if any. Notice I didn't use a white here. I want the whites reserved really for the snow to make them look even whiter. Not all strokes are completely horizontal, even on water. And you can see how I'm working gradually lighter and lighter, so the water is starting to flow over here and fall down on that small ridge. So I'm keeping that paper nice and steady. Pencil's quite sharp as well. Haven't gone in with any pure whites there. I'm always pretty much working going lighter and lighter all the time. So starting with the darkest of the highlights and gradually lightening the pencils. There's more defined small areas in this part of the stream, just with our light is skimming across the surface. Okay, as I put in these final few little touches, hope you've enjoyed this one. Once again, very different. You could obviously have put something in there, perhaps a dipper bird would have been really good. I did toy with that idea as well, but I thought just for once or a couple of times I'd do something that was not really wildlife orientated. This one was all about those colours and tones and showing how a white subject can really be anything but white. So once again, as I put in the final few touches, hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you all again on the next video.